I never thought one night would change everything, but when I caught my stepmom alone in her bedroom, doing something she thought no one would ever see, I felt something shift, something I wasn't ready to admit. I should have walked away, should have looked away, but I didn't, and by the time the night was over, we had crossed a line we could never take back. What started as a quiet evening turned into something I never saw coming, something I couldn't stop. It became one of the most intimate and confusing nights of my life. Let me take you back to where it all began. That night, in our too quiet house. It was strange how quiet the house felt without Dad, no humming from his office computer, no clinking of his coffee mug, no low muttering while he scrolled through work emails. Just silence. The kind that wraps around you and makes your ears ring, makes you suddenly aware of how your breath sounds when it catches. He'd gone on a 3-day business trip, nothing new, but something about this time felt different. The house didn't just feel empty, it felt charged, like something was waiting to happen. I sat on the couch with a blanket around my legs, pretending to be invested in the movie playing on the screen. I wasn't. My eyes kept flickering to the hallway, to the flicker of warm light spilling from underneath the crack of her bedroom door. My stepmom, Elise. Even her name had a softness to it, like it belonged in a poem instead of a family photo album. She'd been upstairs for a while, music playing softly from whatever playlist she had on tonight. Something jazzy, dreamy. It suited her. Everything about her was always composed, elegant, effortless. We'd never been especially close, not in a way that most people would call mother-daughter. She wasn't the let's bake cookies together type, but she wasn't distant either. She had this calm presence that somehow made you want to behave around her, like you didn't want to disappoint her even when she wasn't asking anything of you. I used to tell myself I respected her, that was all. The way I watched her tuck her hair behind her ear, or the way her perfume lingered in the hallway after she passed. It was just admiration, just curiosity. But sometimes, when she walked around in one of those silk robes that clung to her body like water, and her bare feet made no sound against the hardwood floors, I found myself holding my breath, and sometimes I wondered if she noticed. I stood up from the couch, abandoning the movie, and padded down the hallway barefoot. I told myself I was just going to the kitchen for water, maybe check the thermostat because it felt a little too warm. But I stopped just before I turned the corner. Her door was open. Just a sliver, not enough to call it careless, but not closed either. I paused, swallowing the tightness forming in my throat. That soft music was louder now, floating through the hallway like fog, and I caught the sound of movement. Not walking. Something lighter. A shifting of fabric, the creak of her floorboard. I stepped forward, slow, careful, not even thinking about what I was doing, until I was there, standing just close enough to see through the narrow opening of her bedroom door. And there she was. She hadn't seen me. Not yet. Elise stood near her vanity, her back mostly to me, her robe half open and her shoulder bare. Her long dark hair was tucked over one side, the slope of her neck catching the warm lamplight like polished glass. She was swaying, no, dancing, slowly, as if the music had taken her somewhere else entirely. One hand lifted lazily to her collarbone, the other trailing softly down her side, smoothing over the fabric that barely clung to her. Her eyes were half-lidded in the mirror, and she looked serene. She looked beautiful. Something tightened inside me. I knew I should have turned away. It wasn't right. I shouldn't have been standing there watching her like that. But my feet didn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes from the way her hips shifted, or how the robe slipped just enough to reveal the line of her waist. She moved like she was alone, like she didn't think anyone would ever see her this way. Like she wasn't anyone's wife, or anyone's mother. She was just herself, and it was the most intimate thing I'd ever witnessed. Her hand moved lower, fingertips brushing just beneath the dip of her robe. I saw her eyes flutter in the mirror. A soft breath left her lips, and then she stilled. It was subtle, barely anything, but her head tilted, not toward me, not directly. Just enough that the weight of her gaze shifted in my direction. The music kept playing. She didn't speak, but she didn't move either. Her body remained angled toward the mirror, her hand frozen mid-gesture. And I could swear, somewhere behind the flicker of her lashes, she knew, I panicked inside. Every rational thought in me screamed to back away, to leave, to forget this ever happened. But my body betrayed me. I stayed. Her lips curved, just slightly. A flicker of something unreadable passed over her face, and in that second, I realized that I wasn't imagining the heat blooming in my chest or the way my skin prickled. This wasn't just admiration. This wasn't curiosity. It was something else entirely. And when she finally turned away from the mirror, slowly, gracefully, like she wasn't in any hurry, I still didn't move. She didn't call out my name. She didn't say a word. She just reached for her robe, pulling it loosely over her shoulder again, tying it with no urgency at all. I stepped back then, quiet. Breath caught in my throat like a secret. My fingers trembled at my sides. I should have looked away, but I didn't. And the worst part? I think she knew I was there. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of Elise in her room flickered behind my lids like a film reel I couldn't shut off. The sway of her body, the way the lamplight traced her curves, the possibility, no, the certainty, that she'd seen me, that she knew I was watching and didn't stop. My mind twisted it in 100 different directions, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out whether it had all just been a weird coincidence or if it meant something more. But by the time dawn broke and the first gray light filtered through my curtains, I still didn't have an answer. When I finally made it downstairs, the scent of fresh coffee and buttered toast was already drifting through the air. She was in the kitchen, moving around like nothing had happened. Her robe was replaced by a fitted long-sleeve top and soft lounge pants, her hair tied up in a messy bun, a few strands framing her face, effortlessly beautiful, casual yet perfect, always perfect. "Morning," she said as I entered, her tone light, friendly, familiar. "Morning," I replied, trying to match her ease, though my voice sounded thinner than usual. I sat down at the table and poured myself some orange juice, and with hands that didn't feel entirely steady. She handed me a plate of scrambled eggs and toast like she always did on the weekends when it was just us. But I felt her glance linger just a beat too long, and when I looked up, she was already turning back to the stovetop. Nothing was said, but everything felt different. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was filled with the sounds of a normal morning. Cutlery clinking against the plate, the bubbling of the coffee machine, the low hum of the fridge. But under all of that was this invisible thread pulling tight between us. Tension in the way she moved around me, the way her voice seemed just a little softer than usual, the way I couldn't stop looking at her lips every time she took a sip of coffee. I kept telling myself I had imagined last night. Maybe she hadn't seen me after all. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. The way she paused, the way her eyes flicked toward the hallway. Maybe I had stood there too long and projected meaning into something innocent. But then she turned and looked at me across the kitchen, and there it was again. That look, just a flicker. A spark of something in her eyes I couldn't name but felt all the way in my chest. "You didn't sleep well," she said, not a question, just a quiet observation. My fork paused mid-bite. No, not really. She gave a soft hum and turned back to the counter, reaching for a fruit bowl. "You were up late," she had added. I thought I heard movement in the hallway. My heart skipped. "Just didn't sleep," I said quickly. Too quickly. She didn't say anything more, but I saw the faint smile tug at the corner of her mouth as she peeled an orange with delicate fingers. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but it felt heavy with things unsaid. She handed me a few slices of orange without looking directly at me. That entire morning, her touches became something else. They were small things. Light brushes of her hand against my shoulder when she reached past me, the way her fingers lingered on mine when she passed the salt, the occasional glance that felt more like a question than a look. And still, she didn't say a word about the night before. She didn't acknowledge what I'd seen or the way I had watched her. But her body language screamed louder than words ever could. I found myself studying her more closely than ever. The curve of her neck as she leaned over the sink, the way her lips pressed together when she focused, the slight sway in her hips as she moved around the kitchen. It was like I had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and now I was seeing her in a way I couldn't unsee. Then came the moment I couldn't explain away. I was standing at the counter, filling a glass of water, when she stepped behind me. I didn't notice how close she was until I felt her body brush against my back. Not hard, not forceful, just close enough that I could feel her warmth through the thin fabric of my t-shirt. Her arm lifted, reaching above me for a mug on the top shelf, and her chest pressed lightly into my shoulder. I froze, my breath hitched in my throat, and I didn't dare move. Her hair brushed my cheek, and I could smell the soft, floral scent of her shampoo. Lavender and something else I couldn't name. She didn't say a word, didn't pull away quickly like it was an accident. She stayed there for a second too long, long enough to make me feel like the room had narrowed down to just her and me, and this impossible space between our bodies that had suddenly disappeared. And then, just like that, she stepped back, mug in hand, and smiled softly. "Sorry," she said, her voice a little lower now, a little warmer. "Didn't mean to crowd you." I turned around slowly, trying to catch my breath. Her eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. "It's okay," I said. It came out too quiet. We stared at each other for a second that felt like forever, and then she turned and walked away, humming softly under her breath, as if nothing had happened at all. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, TV, my phone, or even reading. Everything felt tinted by her presence, by the way her touch had lingered up, by the look in her eyes. I replayed it all over and over, trying to convince myself I was making it into something it wasn't, that I was just projecting feelings I shouldn't have. Maybe I was the only one losing my mind, but deep down I knew better. I tried to tell myself it meant nothing, but the look in her eyes said otherwise. It rained the next day. Not the kind of soft, comforting drizzle that lulled you into daydreams, but a heavy, relentless downpour that turned the sky a dull gray and made the house feel like it was floating in a bubble of quiet isolation. I spent most of the morning pretending to be occupied, wandering from room to room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, occasionally stopping to stare out the window like I was searching for something. I wasn't. Not really. Elise had been in and out of the living room all morning, wearing that fitted sweater that somehow looked too elegant for loungewear, and a pair of yoga pants that clung to her hips in a way that made my stomach tighten every time she passed. She didn't act any differently, not overtly, but there was a new rhythm to the way she moved around me, like she was aware of every step, every glance, every moment we shared the same air. I caught her watching me once. Just once. I had turned from the bookshelf, a novel half in my hand, and found her leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, eyes on me in a way that made my throat go dry. She didn't look away, didn't flinch. She just held my gaze for a second too long before giving a small smile and walking off like nothing had happened. It had me spiraling for hours. By early afternoon, the rain hadn't let up, and the house felt impossibly still. I found myself hovering near her room, under the weak excuse of needing to borrow a charger. The door was ajar, just like it had been that night. She was inside, sitting on the floor by the window, cross-legged, a stack of photo albums spread around her like a sea of memories. She looked up when I knocked, her eyes softening the second she saw me. "Hey," she said, voice quiet, like the rain had asked her to whisper. "Sorry to bother you," I said, holding up the phone. "Do you have a charger I could borrow? Mine's dead." "Of course," she nodded and gestured toward the nightstand. "Top drawer." I walked in slowly, careful not to step on the edges of the albums, my gaze drifting toward the scattered photos, snapshots of vacations, birthday parties, old family barbecues. I recognized some of them, others were before my time. Elise followed my eyes and smiled. "I was just feeling nostalgic," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's weird, isn't it? Looking back on all these frozen moments. Sometimes it feels like they happened to someone else." I crouched beside her, unable to help myself. "You look so different in this one," I said, pointing to a picture of her on a beach, her hair shorter, laughter frozen mid-frame. "That was right before I met your dad," she murmured. "Feels like a lifetime ago." She didn't sound sad, just distant, like she was standing in a memory far from here, speaking to me across some invisible gap. I sat down next to her, our shoulders almost touching, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. The rain pattered against the glass, soft and rhythmic, and the room felt warmer than before, closer. "You were beautiful then," I said without thinking. Then I froze. "I mean, you still are. Her gaze slid toward me, amused but not mocking. "It's okay," she said gently. "Thank you." There was a pause, long and loaded, then she looked back at the photo in her hand. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes I wonder if people ever really see me anymore, not just the mom, the wife, the responsible one." Her voice thinned a little. "It's easy to disappear into the roles you play." I didn't know what to say at first. but then I heard myself whisper, "I see you." She turned toward me, something unreadable flashing in her eyes, and for a moment we were just two women sitting in the quiet of a rainy afternoon, surrounded by memories that didn't feel like they belonged to us anymore. The tension had changed. It wasn't sharp or shocking now. It was quieter, deeper, like a secret neither of us had the courage to name. She shifted slightly, her knee brushing mine. She didn't move it away. "Come here," she said suddenly, reaching for another album. "I want to show you something." I scooted closer, heart pounding for reasons I didn't fully understand. She opened a new album and pointed to a picture of her in an old apartment, barefoot and smiling, paints on her jeans. "That was my first place on my own," she said. I felt free for the first time in my life. I smiled. "You look happy." She glanced at me, her expression softening. I was, for a while. Her hand brushed mine again, but this time I didn't pretend it was an accident, and neither did she. For a few seconds, we sat in the stillness, her fingers lightly resting against mine, not gripping, not holding, just there. It was such a small thing, and yet it felt like the loudest sound in the world. Every nerve in my body buzzed, every part of me screamed to pull away or lean in or say something, but I couldn't move. And then slowly she turned toward me, her hand lifted, brushing lightly against my cheek as she tucked a piece of hair behind my ear. Her touch was feather light, like she was testing the shape of the moment, seeing if it would shatter. My eyes met hers, and I knew then that this wasn't just in my head. This wasn't one-sided. This wasn't confusion. It was my intention. "Elise," I whispered, her name catching in my throat like it wasn't mine to say. She didn't reply. She just leaned in, her lips hovering close to mine, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat of them. And in that space between us, everything spun. But then, like she had heard something distant, she pulled back, just slightly. Her hand dropped and she turned away, looking back out the window like nothing had happened. "I should finish organizing these," she murmured. "I've been putting it off forever." The moment dissolved around us, just like that. I stood up slowly, still breathless, still trying to calm the storm inside me. "Yeah, I should let you get to it." She didn't stop me, and didn't look back. I left the room with my mind spinning, my heart still pounding in my chest. The warmth of her touch lingered on my skin like a whisper. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that it hadn't meant anything, but the look in her eyes said otherwise. And there was much yet to come. The rain had finally stopped by the time the sky turned black. The house felt like it was holding its breath, as if even the walls understood that something had shifted, and now everything was suspended in this delicate, quiet tension. I hadn't seen Elise since earlier that afternoon. Not really. Just glimpses. Her footsteps on the stairs, the sound of her voice on the phone, a door creaking open, then softly shutting again. My dad was still gone, hours away, in another city, and the silence that came with his absence had started to feel like something alive, like space had been made for something else to take root. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the blanket pulled up to my chest, but I wasn't cold. I was burning, actually, flushed from the inside out. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in her room, the way she'd touched my face, the way her breath had warmed the air between us, the way she'd pulled back. Not because she didn't want it, but because she did, and she was afraid of what that meant. I wasn't sure how long I lay there like that, restless and awake, when I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps. My door creaked open slightly, and for a second, I didn't move. My heart jumped into my throat. I turned just enough to see her silhouette standing there, framed in the glow of the hallway light, her robe tied loosely at the waist, hair falling down her shoulders. She said nothing. Didn't need to. "Are you awake?" she asked gently. I swallowed hard, my voice thin. "Yeah." There was a pause, long enough for the air to thicken between us again, before she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The latch clicked with finality, like the world had just gotten smaller. "I didn't want to be alone tonight," she said softly, almost like an apology. I sat up slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the blanket. "Me either." She didn't say anything else. She just walked over, calm and graceful as ever, and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under her weight. I could smell her. Clean skin and lavender, that same scent that lingered in the hallway whenever she passed me. Her hand reached out, resting on top of mine. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice quiet. I nodded, but it felt like my heart might break under the weight of everything I wasn't saying. I think so. Are you? She looked at me then, not just with her eyes, but with everything in her, the kind of look that strips away every defense you've ever built. No, she whispered, but I want to be. I didn't know who leaned in first. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was me. All I know is that when our lips touched, everything stopped. The world tilted, softened. It wasn't rushed or wild. It wasn't hungry or desperate. It was real, tender. Her mouth moved against mine like she'd been waiting years to do it, like the pressure of restraint had finally crumbled. Her hand cupped my jaw, her thumb brushing the corner of my mouth, and the warmth of her touch made my whole body hum. I let out a shaky breath when we finally pulled apart, our foreheads pressed together, eyes closed. "This is wrong," I whispered, her fingers threaded through mine. "I know, but I don't want to stop. I don't either." Her hand drifted to my shoulder, sliding the strap of my tank top down slowly, her fingers grazing my skin like she was discovering something sacred. I shivered, not from cold, but from the softness of it, from the way she handled me like I was something delicate, something she didn't want to break. "You're so beautiful," she murmured, almost to herself. My breath caught in my throat. She climbed into the bed next to me, pulling the blanket over us both, and I turned to face her. We were so close now, her eyes inches from mine, her breath brushing my lips. I could feel every inch of her beside me, and still, she didn't rush. She just looked at me, and something in me broke wide open. "I used to think it was admiration," I whispered. "The way I looked at you, I told myself it was innocent." Her fingers brushed a strand of hair from my face. "And now? Now I can't lie to myself anymore." She smiled softly, sadly. "I've felt it too," she said. "Longer than I want to admit." The confession unraveled something inside me, and I leaned into her touch, my face pressed against the curve of her neck, her arms wrapped around me, pulling me in, her body warm and solid against mine. We stayed like that for a while, just breathing, just holding on, and then her hand slid under the hem of my shirt, slow, tentative, her fingers ghosting over my skin with a reverence that made my chest ache. My breath hitched, but I didn't stop her. I wanted her. I wanted this, not because it was reckless, but because it was us, something unspoken that had been growing in the shadows for too long. She kissed me again, this time deeper, her lips coaxing mine open, her body pressing into mine like she couldn't bear to keep the distance any longer. Her hands explored me carefully, each touch asking a silent question, and my body answered all of them. It wasn't about lust, it wasn't about rebellion, it was something else entirely. Something tender, frightening, and beautiful. Every whisper, every brush of skin, every quiet breath felt like we were writing a new language together. One only we could understand. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. Our bodies did the talking, soft touches, slow movements, the kind of closeness that erased the world outside the walls of that room. She kissed my chest gently, her fingers tracing invisible paths over my skin like she was memorizing me, and I clung to her, like I'd fall apart if I didn't. At some point, we stopped moving, just lay there tangled up together, her arm around my waist, my head resting on her shoulder. I could hear her heartbeat, slow, steady, real. She pressed a kiss to my forehead and whispered, "You're safe with me." I believed her. I didn't ask what would happen tomorrow. I didn't bring up my dad or the million reasons this was wrong. All I knew was this moment, this warmth, this truth between us that had finally been set free. When I finally fell asleep in her arms, I knew I would never be the same again. The morning light was soft, pouring through the cracks in the curtains and golden ribbons. It painted the room in a kind of silence that felt heavier than the night before, like the universe had paused to watch what would happen next. I blinked slowly, adjusting to the light, only to realize I wasn't alone. But I also wasn't being held anymore. Elise sat at the edge of the bed, her back to me, wrapped in her robe. Her hair was pulled up again, loose strands trailing down her neck, and her hands were resting in her lap like she'd been sitting there for a while. Thinking. Watching the rain-soaked world wake up outside the window. She didn't say anything when I stirred, just remained still, her shoulders rising and falling with each quiet breath. I sat up slowly, the blanket slipping down around my waist, and for a few moments I just looked at her, the woman who had once been my stepmother in name only, the woman I had just given myself to in a way that felt terrifyingly complete. The silence between us wasn't cold, but it was thick with unspoken truths. "Elise," I finally said, my voice barely more than a whisper. She turned slightly, just enough to glance over her shoulder at me. Her expression was soft, tired, but not regretful. "I didn't want to wake you," she murmured. "You looked so peaceful." I offered a shaky smile. I didn't feel peaceful. Her lips curved in return, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Me either." A few seconds passed, both of us swimming in the heaviness of what we were too afraid to say. Then she turned fully, folding one leg under the other, her gaze settling on mine with quiet certainty. "I know what we did wasn't right," she said. "I know what it looks like, what it is." I looked down at the blanket, fingers twisting in the fabric. "I can't stop thinking about Dad," I admitted. "What he'd say if he ever found out, what this means for him, for us." "I know," she said, her voice low. "But I don't regret it." My head snapped up. She held my gaze, firm but gentle. I won't, because this didn't start last night. It's been building for a long time, I just never let myself believe it." She paused, swallowing hard. "Not until you looked at me the way you did. Not until I realized I'd been waiting for it without even knowing." Something inside me cracked. I felt seen in a way I never had before, not just noticed, not just touched, but understood, completely, and that scared me more than anything. "But what happens now?" I asked, my voice small. "Do we pretend it didn't happen, go back to being quiet strangers passing in hallways, or do we try to live in this thing between us?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't have the answers. All I know is last night was the first time in a long time I felt like myself. Like I wasn't performing, like I was allowed to want something without shame." Her words sank into me slowly, like warm water over frozen skin, and as much as I wanted to argue about morality, about loyalty, about everything that made this feel impossible, I couldn't, because I had felt it too. That same unshakable clarity, that same strange forbidden comfort. Elise leaned forward, brushing her fingers along my cheek, her touch feather-light. "You're not a mistake," she whispered. "What we felt wasn't a mistake." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. I leaned into her hand, closing the space between us, not with words, but with a kiss. Soft, hesitant, full of questions, but underneath it was something steadier, a kind of knowing, a kind of surrender. When we pulled back, her forehead rested against mine, and we both breathed out at the same time, as if we'd been holding the air in since sunrise. "I don't know where we go from here," I said quietly, "but I know I've never felt more like myself than I did in your arms." Elise didn't say anything else after that. She just held me, quietly, like she knew that words would only ruin the fragile truth we'd finally allowed to exist between us. We stayed there, wrapped up in the same blanket, her hand resting lightly over mine, our breaths sinking in the silence. But even as her warmth settled around me, something inside twisted. She was my stepmother, the woman who